It's the kind of story that feels like it should be true. A moment of casual disrespect, an act of corporate indifference, that ends up costing a company not just its reputation, but billions of dollars. While the airline and the people in this story are fictional, they represent a powerful, what-if scenario. What if the person you just humiliated had the power to make you pay? Really pay? This is a story about that, a modern parable of how one man turned a painful injustice into a lesson in accountability that an entire industry would never forget. Hook. The first-class cabin of American Global Air Flight 732 was quiet, the kind of polite, stuffy silence you only find at 30,000 feet. That silence wasn't broken by a shout, but by a quiet, condescending question. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see that boarding pass again." The words were aimed at Eleanor, a 76-year-old woman with silver hair and gentle eyes, who looked up, startled, from her book. Next to her, her son, Malcolm, felt that familiar, cold knot tighten in his stomach. He watched as a flight attendant and two uniformed security officers loomed over his mother. It was an overwhelming show of force for a woman who weighed maybe 120 pounds, soaking wet. "Is there a problem?" Malcolm asked, his voice calm, level, and dangerously steady. The lead security officer barely gave him a glance. His focus was entirely on the elderly woman sitting in a seat he clearly believed she couldn't possibly belong in. "Sir, this is a security matter. Please step aside," he said, his voice dripping with dismissive authority. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us. Now." As they led his mother, confused and deeply humiliated, off the plane, the airline had no idea what it had just done. They hadn't just insulted a passenger. They had humiliated the mother of one of the most powerful, and quietly ruthless, strategic investors in the country. It was a mistake in judgment. An error in protocol. And it was a mistake that was about to cost them $5 billion. Section 1, The Injustice. Eleanor was not one to make a scene. A retired librarian, she had raised her son on a shoestring budget and a surplus of love, books, and principle. Her life was defined by quiet dignity. Flying first class was a novelty, a gift from Malcolm, who insisted she travel in comfort to see her new grandchild. "You spent your life making sure I had the best," he told her. "It's my turn." So there she was in seat 4A, feeling a little out of place but enjoying the simple luxury. She was holding a well-worn book of poetry and had just settled in, her heart full of anticipation. The problem started small. A flight attendant passed, then doubled back, her eyes lingering on Eleanor with a flicker of suspicion. A few minutes later, the same attendant returned with the purser. They whispered near the galley, their glances darting back to seat 4A. Eleanor felt a prickle of unease. She was the only black person in the first-class cabin, a fact she noted with the weary awareness that had been part of her life for over 70 years. She'd learned long ago how to navigate spaces where her presence was questioned, but this felt different. More overt. More accusatory. The purser finally approached, a strained smile plastered on his face. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you, but we have a small discrepancy with our seating chart. Could I please see your ticket?" Malcolm, who had been on a business call, ended it abruptly. He watched his mother, with her usual grace, hand over her boarding pass. The purser glanced at it, then at his tablet. The smile tightened. "I see," he said, the two words carrying an ocean of disbelief. "There appears to be an issue. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to the gate so we can sort this out." Eleanor's brow furrowed. "Sort what out?" "My son bought this ticket for me." "We believe there's been a mistake," the purser said, his tone shifting from fake polite to coldly official. He'd already made up his mind, she was a fraud. He believed this elderly woman had somehow sneaked into the wrong cabin, and he was there to correct the error. The humiliation was thick in the air. Other passengers were now staring, annoyed at the delay. Eleanor's cheeks flushed. She, a woman who had never returned a library book late, was being treated like a common thief. That's when the purser gestured to the front of the plane, and 2 airport security officers walked on board. Section 2, The Big Mistake. Malcolm stood up. His movements were slow, deliberate, a stark contrast to the frantic energy of the airline staff. At 6'2", with a presence forged in countless hostile boardrooms, his stillness carried more weight than any shout ever could. "Excuse me," he said again, his voice still quiet but now edged with steel. "This is my mother, Eleanor. I bought this ticket." "What, exactly, is the problem?" This was the moment, the fork in the road. A simple apology, a quick check of their own systems, a shred of professional courtesy, could have stopped the disaster before it began. Instead, the lead security officer, a man named Harris, made the second huge mistake of the day. He saw Malcolm not as a concerned son, but as an obstacle. "Sir, like I said, this is a security matter," Harris repeated, his voice louder this time, designed to intimidate. "This doesn't concern you. We need the passenger in this seat to deplane. Now. It concerns me when you accuse my 76-year-old mother of, what are you accusing her of?" Malcolm's eyes were locked on Harris. "That her ticket is fake. That she doesn't belong here." The purser stepped in, trying to de-escalate, but only made it worse. "Sir, we can offer your mother a seat in Economy Plus and a travel voucher for the trouble. We just need to clear the cabin for departure." A voucher. They had publicly shamed his mother and were now offering a token, an insult disguised as compensation. It was the corporate equivalent of a pat on the head. This wasn't just bad customer service, it was a profound failure of human decency. It sent a clear message: they saw his mother not as a customer, but as a problem to be dismissed. "We won't be needing your voucher," Malcolm said, the words hanging in the air, cold and heavy. Harris, completely misreading the room, saw this as defiance. He took a half-step toward Eleanor. "Ma'am, let's go. Don't make this difficult." Malcolm held up a hand, a gesture that was both a stop sign and a promise. He looked at his mother, whose face was a mask of pain as she tried to hold on to her dignity. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. "It's all right, Mom. Let's go. We'll take a different flight." As he helped his mother from her seat, he walked with her up the jet bridge. The purser, looking relieved, called after them, "You can speak to customer service at the terminal. They'll handle your rebooking." They had no idea who they were talking to. They thought they had just solved a problem. What they had actually done was light the fuse on a $5 billion bomb, and the man holding the detonator was walking away, his face an unreadable mask of cold, calculated fury. Section 3, The Reveal. To the employees of American Global Air, Malcolm was just an anonymous, well-dressed man. They couldn't have known they were looking at the co-founder of Veritas Tech, a giant in the world of AI and biotech. But that wasn't the half of it. What they really didn't know was that Malcolm was also a senior managing partner at East Point Capital. East Point Capital wasn't just another investment firm. It was a behemoth, a private equity firm with a staggering $90 billion in global holdings. They didn't just invest in companies. They shaped them, restructured them, and, if needed, dismantled them. They were the quiet force behind dozens of Fortune 500 companies. And within that $90 billion portfolio, East Point Capital held a massive, $5 billion stake in American Global Air. This made them one of the airline's single largest institutional investors. It gave them leverage. It gave them power. It gave them a voice that could summon the CEO with a single phone call. Malcolm wasn't just any passenger they had wronged. He was, for all intents and purposes, their boss. He was the man whose firm's money guaranteed the loans for their new planes. He was the man who, in a very real sense, owned a piece of the very plane they had just kicked his mother off of. Malcolm's own story was the embodiment of the American dream they so casually dismissed. He grew up in a small apartment overflowing with library books his mother brought home. She taught him that knowledge was the one currency that could never be taken away. He earned scholarships, worked 3 jobs to send money home, and built a tech empire from a garage. As he sat with his mother in the sterile airport lounge, comforting her with a cup of tea, his mind was already at work. The initial, hot rage had cooled into something far more dangerous: strategy. He wasn't thinking about a lawsuit or a viral tweet. That was the response of the powerless. He was thinking on a different scale. He was thinking about accountability, not just for the employees on the plane, but for the entire corporate culture that let it happen. He was about to teach American global air a lesson. A $5 billion lesson. Section 4, The Calculated Revenge, Part 1, The Confrontation. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in silent warfare. Malcolm didn't post on social media. He didn't call the news. He made 2 phone calls. The first was to his head of legal at East Point. The second was to the lead partner who managed the American Global Air portfolio. His instructions were simple and chillingly calm. Clear my schedule. And get me in a room with the CEO and the entire executive board of American Global Air. Tell them it's about our $5 billion position. They have 48 hours. The summons from East Point sent a jolt of panic through the airline C-suite. A meeting like this could only mean a hostile takeover or a catastrophic withdrawal. The CEO, Richard Morrison, spent the next day and a half scrambling, assuming it was about disappointing quarterly numbers. He and his team walked into their gleaming Manhattan boardroom armed with charts and forecasts, expecting a fight over financials. They were completely unprepared for what was coming. Malcolm arrived alone, wearing a simple dark suit. He nodded to the dozen executives around the mahogany table and took a seat. Morrison started, his voice exuding confidence. "Malcolm, good to see you. I assume this is about the Q3 guidance. I want to assure you, the turbulence in the market is temporary, and our..." Malcolm held up a hand, cutting him off. "Richard, we're not here to talk about Q3. He opened his portfolio and slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of a boarding pass. Seat 4A. Passenger name, Eleanor. I believe you had an issue with this passenger 2 days ago on Flight 732, Malcolm said, his voice as quiet as it had been on the plane. Perhaps you can explain it to me. Confused glances shot around the table. A boarding pass? The COO leaned forward. Malcolm, I'm not sure I understand. If a customer had a complaint. She's not just a customer, Malcolm interrupted. She is my mother. And she was profiled, accused of fraud, and publicly humiliated by your staff before being removed by armed security. The color drained from Richard Morrison's face. He suddenly connected the dots. The emergency meeting, the name on the ticket, the cold fury in Malcolm's eyes. It was a dawning horror of corporate self-sabotage. My team has already been busy, Malcolm continued, his tone clinical. We have the security footage. We have the internal communications from the flight crew. We have statements from 2 other first-class passengers who were appalled. We even have your purser's report, which cites seating discrepancy and non-compliance, a blatant lie to cover up a clear case of racial bias. He let the words hang in the silent room. He wasn't yelling. He was presenting evidence, dissecting a fatally flawed asset. This isn't about one bad employee, Richard, Malcolm said, locking eyes with the CEO. This is about a rotten culture. A culture where your staff feel empowered to make assumptions based on skin color and are protected by a system that lets them lie about it. This is a systemic failure. And as an investor, systemic failure is my primary concern. You introduced an unacceptable level of risk into your own operations. And that is something my firm simply cannot tolerate. Section 5, The Calculated Revenge, Part 2, The $5 billion Ultimatum. The mood in the boardroom had shifted from confusion to pure terror. They finally got it. This wasn't a PR problem they could smooth over with a press release and a diversity seminar. This was an existential threat. Richard Morrison, the CEO, finally found his voice, stammering, "Malcolm. I am horrified. Speechless. We will launch an immediate investigation. The employees involved will be terminated. We will issue a formal, public apology to your mother. To you. Whatever you want, we will make it right." Malcolm let the desperate promises hang in the air before shooting them down. It's too late for that. He pulled out a second document from his portfolio and slid it to the center of the table. "This is not a negotiation," he stated. "This is your only way forward." The document wasn't a request for money. It was a mandate for total, systemic reform, drafted by the sharpest minds at East Point Capital. It was an ultimatum. First, Malcolm began, you won't just fire the employees. You will overhaul your entire customer service training. You will work with 3 of the nation's top civil rights organizations, that we choose, to develop a new, mandatory anti-bias and de-escalation program for all 80,000 of your employees. He continued, his voice methodical. Second, you will implement a new, transparent system for tracking all discrimination complaints. This system will be audited by a third party every 6 months, with the results delivered to a new oversight committee and made public. Third, you will create a multi-million-dollar fund, with your own corporate money, to compensate any passenger with a credible discrimination claim against your airline, going back 5 years. The room was dead silent. What Malcolm was demanding was unprecedented. It was a complete surrender of their corporate autonomy. It would be expensive, humiliating, and expose them to a tidal wave of lawsuits. Morrison looked up, his face pale. "Malcolm, this is extensive. It will take time. You have 30 days to announce your public, irrevocable commitment to every point in this proposal," Malcolm said. "And if you don't?" He paused. "If you fail to agree, or miss a single deadline, East Point Capital will begin the immediate and total divestment of our $5 billion stake in American Global Air." $5 billion. To the people in that room, that number wasn't abstract. It was the bedrock of their financial stability. Pulling that much capital would be a cataclysmic vote of no confidence. It would signal to Wall Street and their lenders that East Point Capital, one of the smartest players in the game, had declared American Global Air a sinking ship. The stock would nosedive. Their credit rating would be slashed. It would trigger a death spiral from which they might never recover. "Let me be perfectly clear," Malcolm said, standing to leave. "This isn't about revenge. My mother would be horrified by petty vengeance. This is about accountability. This is about ensuring no one's mother or father ever has to endure that again on one of your flights. You created a culture that allowed this. Now you will fix it. Or we will liquidate you." He walked to the door, then turned back. "My mother taught me to turn the other cheek. My career has taught me to protect my investments. And right now, the dignity of your passengers has become my investment. Don't fail to protect it." He walked out, leaving a stunned boardroom in his wake. Section 6, The Aftermath. The airline's board spent the next 72 hours in a frantic panic. Their own advisors all came back with the same grim conclusion: they had no leverage. Malcolm had them cornered, flawlessly. He hadn't broken any laws, he was simply an investor protecting his capital from the risks of a poorly run company. The story, if it got out, would make the airline the villain every single time. They were trapped. The choice was simple: humiliation and reform, or annihilation. On the 29th day, just before the deadline, American Global Air issued a press release that sent shockwaves through the industry. They announced a groundbreaking new passenger Bill of Rights. They detailed the key pillars of Malcolm's ultimatum: the new training, the audits, the compensation fund, carefully leaving out the part where they were forced into it. The story came out anyway. A major financial newspaper published a leaked account of the boardroom confrontation. CEO's Revenge, How a mother's humiliation cost an airline its autonomy, ran the headline. Hashtags like hashtag #FlyWithDignity and hashtag $5 billion lesson exploded online. Cell phone footage of the incident went viral, playing on a loop on cable news. The fallout at the airline was brutal. The CEO, Richard Morrison, was forced to resign. The security guard and the purser were fired. But Malcolm's plan went deeper. The forced reforms began to take root. The first audit revealed dozens of buried complaints, which were now handled by the new fund. Other airlines, terrified of facing a similar reckoning, began reviewing their own policies. Malcolm's quiet move had triggered an industry-wide ripple effect. Conclusion. The story of Malcolm and Eleanor became a modern parable about power and dignity. It resonated because it touches on a universal pain, seeing a loved one treated with disrespect. But it also offers a powerful fantasy, that such an injustice could be met with overwhelming and systemic retribution. This isn't just about this one story. It reflects a new reality where power is shifting. The most effective way to change a corporation's behavior is to speak the only language it truly understands, the bottom line. What Malcolm did was transform personal humiliation into a catalyst for institutional reform. He proved that dignity isn't a soft metric, it's a tangible asset, and failing to protect it is a catastrophic business risk. He forced an entire industry to confront the fact that the person they underestimate in the check-in line might just own the company. In the end, Eleanor never flew on American Global Air again. She didn't need to. Her son had ensured that the skies would be a little more just for everyone else. They had tried to make her feel small, but in doing so, they revealed just how powerful she, and her son, truly were. Some people react to injustice by making noise. Malcolm reacted by making history.